Is global warming man-made?
Yes. If you look at data from atmospheric science, just historical records, you can see a drastic increase in global temperature starting at around 1850, coinciding with the Industrial Revolution.
I'd say, based on the evidence that I've seen, is that the observed global warming right now is probably roughly 2/3, 3/4 man-made, and maybe 1/3 to 1/4 due to natural processes.
For the better half of the last century, we've been told that global warming is man-made. It's been taught to us that the ecological effects of climate change will soon lead to our demise. It's been promised that the federal government will take care of us through this crisis, and that by regulating our behavior, we will be able to reverse the effects of climate change. But this leads us to the most important question of all: is global warming man-made?
This is Earth. Its mean temperature has risen by 0.5 degrees Celsius since the 70s, and in the last decade has actually begun to cool again. Mars has experienced a nearly identical pattern with an increase of temperature by 0.5 degree and has begun cooling again in the last decade, all despite the planet's lack of industrialization. Since the 1960s, astronomers have noted that the planet Neptune has appeared brighter, which could be attributed to an increase in solar activity. So why the environmental hysteria? Man's output of carbon emissions has increased at an alarming and consistent rate. However, note that the Earth's temperature fluctuates between hot and cold with little regard for man's output of greenhouse gas emissions. In other words,
there is no correlation between greenhouse gas emissions and the Earth's mean temperature!
So how will the ecosystem be affected by climate change? Well, according to this nut job, all of our ice will melt, leading to a rise in sea levels. But despite the recent events in Greenland, here's a short list of icy places that have been virtually unaffected by the climate crisis. So what have our government leaders had to say about all of this?
The President and the Vice President refused to admit that there were any, human contributions to global climate change.
Well, I think it is man-made.
The risks of climate change are real, and that you're seeing climate change. I think human activity is contributing to it.
There is global warming. Human beings are contributing to it.
No, stupid. It's man-bear-pig.
Has the federal government addressed climate change effectively?
The U.S. federal government? Absolutely not. If it actually was addressing anthropogenic climate change, then the first thing that would happen is a shift in the energy industry.
Well, I've put forward a very substantial proposal to get 80% reductions in greenhouse gases by 2050. That is going to require that we change how power plants operate. That's going to require that we increase fuel efficiency standards, that we develop clean and renewable sources like solar and wind and biodiesel.
The plan involved the creation of the Center on Climate Change and National Security, a subdivision of the Central Intelligence Agency to combat global warming as a threat to national security. And along with the Defense Science Board has recommended to President Obama that he create a new government agency dedicated solely to the combat of global warming. However, such an administration already exists, the Environmental Protection Agency, created in the 1970s by a crook who apparently had the environment on his mind. And just what exactly does the EPA do? It tells us how to heat ourselves, cool ourselves, insulate our homes, and to recycle.
Let me explain recycling to you. This is plastic. It takes more energy and releases more toxins into the air by recreating it and melting it down than it does to just make it from scratch. That's right, recycling plastic is actually bad for the environment. It belongs in a trash can and in a landfill. This is paper. By throwing it away, you create a higher demand for it, which comes from tree farms who are then more inclined to plant more trees. That's right, by recycling paper, less trees actually exist in the world. It belongs in a trash can and in a landfill. This is metal. Metal is actually worth something and takes less energy to recreate than it does to make from scratch. So aside from metals, recycling is a waste of money, it is a waste of time, it is a waste of energy, and most importantly, recycling is
just plain bullshit.
And where does the EPA get its information? Other government agencies, including itself. So the government creates more government, which gathers information from the government and gives it back to the government. The government then responds by creating even more government, presumably to gather more government information and give it back to the government, which then turns out junk legislation such as the Clean Air Act, which ended up only putting more pollution in the air than it did take out.
Still not skeptical about man's involvement in climate change? Consider the following statement given by Dr. Patrick Moore, co-founder of Greenpeace, who abruptly left the organization in the 1980s for the following reasons.
Whereas the ultra-left element that came into the environmental movement was because
world communism failed, and a whole lot of peaceniks and political activists who didn't have a focus on nuclear war anymore moved into the environmental movement, bringing their neo-Marxism with them, learned to use green language in a very clever way to cloak agendas that are really more about anti-globalization and anti-capitalism than they are about science or ecology. Not that those aren't legitimate subjects, but I think it's misinformation to cloak anti-globalization and anti-capitalism in green language to make it appear as though it's an environmental issue.
Are there any legitimate reasons one would have for being skeptical about global warming?
Scientifically, if you're a good scientist, you should always be a skeptic. I mean, I don't mind skepticism. Skepticism pushes good quality scientific data and real solid science.
No, I know that I'm not all that you got. I guess that I just thought maybe we could find new ways to fall apart. But our friends are back, so let's raise